Hi everybody. Hello Mallory Aller. How you doing?
Hey, how are you?
Hello again. Welcome again to the podcast.
I'm very, very happy to be here again.
But you're not as happy as I am to have you, and you're not as happy as our listeners to have you on again. So you're into linguistics. That's your thing. We want to talk about the Expanse. Expanse. It's a series of books adapted to a new show. Now it's going to be on Amazon. Season 4 is going to be out in December. And a big part of the show, if you have never seen the show or have never read the book, it's the community of people living on the asteroid belts.
In the asteroid belts between Saturn and Jupiter, mining the asteroids for minerals. So we have Martians, and we have what we call belters, the people who live out in the belt and are basically the working class of the solar system.
The year is 2350. They have a whole different culture and a whole different language.
Just like they have a whole different out view on life, just like it's completely different than Earth, I think.
And you can feel that in the way they talk, right? Culture
Definitely.
creates language, language creates culture. It's a dual process.
Detective Miller, he's a really interesting character to me because he's our introduction to belters and who they are. But I don't even know if he would be quote unquote like a true belter or a belter Loda. He's not. He's specifically outcast, but he lives on Ceres. But some belters believe themselves to kind of be the true belt by living in the asteroid belt and doing these ship runs and kind of junking for a living. It's really crazy, isn't it?
It is
Different
crazy.
Culture, different but yet they all speak English. It's
But it's mixed, so it's a little bit different between the books and the show. By the way, he works for an Earther, like an Earth-3 Marcy corporation, right?
Right.
He works with Earthers, so maybe that's why he has to not be 100% builder. He has to walk the fine line. But the
Right.
language itself, it's a combination of, correct me if I'm wrong, English, Spanish, a lot of Spanish in the books, and maybe some Chinese, and maybe some imagined stuff, and the result is in the show. It's quite outstanding for me.
I think so too. I really do. Unfortunately, though, I have to say that the wiki page, the fan page for Belter Creole, is wow. It's a real
A bad wow or a good wow?
well. So as a linguist, I believe that there's no such thing as kind of good or bad descriptions of a language. There's to me there's sensitive and insensitive, where. So I think that while the Belter wiki page is sensitive to new learners of Belter, it's not very sensitive to those who have been trained to look at languages and to kind of piece them together. Because wowee, what a language! I think what we've got here is a situation where you had someone come in and really look not so much at these bigger, more Eurocentric languages, but rather looked at Creoles as a model for Belter. And I think that's because they wanted to portray Belters as the undergroup, as the underdog. Yeah, the outgroup.
Pidgins and Creoles are new languages that develop when speakers of different languages come into contact with each other and have a need to communicate. Many Pidgins and Creoles have arisen when colonial powers came into contact with local people as they spread around the world.
Also, it's a very mixed society. We haven't mentioned it, but there are
Right.
people from all over Earth,
All
all
over.
kinds of ethnicities and cultures, all mixed together.
Right.
And the result, you're referring to it as Creole. What is like the general description, general meaning of Creole?
So pigeons have no native speakers. They arise because of the need for a lingua franca. But if that language survives and becomes the native language of the next generation, then it is now a Creole language.
No matter who controls cities or home, to them, we will always be slaves. That's all we are to the earthers and dusters. They built their solar system on our backs, spilt the blood of 1 million of our brothers, but in their eyes, we are not even human anymore.
In my opinion, a Creole is a language that just still needs a bit of non-linguistic development in this sense. And I mean, like, the culture needs to accept the language as the language and not as this variety or variant. So I think we have two languages that come into contact with one another. They don't speak the same, but they use a superstrate or something like English, French, Portuguese. They would use these as reference points. And that's why they kind of become known as lingua francas. This is English and French, not, but you would have all kinds of interactions, and unfortunately, oppression makes a really great pressure cooker for a lot of languages. So you had many brave men and women and children who would come together and survive by kind of inferring through different shared languages what it meant. And when you have a community that's built around that, that's how a Creole develops. And it's kind of seen as lesser than.
Yeah.
And there's
it's like
a really
mix
big
of the. Sorry to interrupt you. It's kind of like a mix of the foreign invading quote unquote or not quote unquote language, usually French or English, with the local languages, and a mixing and matching, and then it creates either something that is different or a little bit different or a combination, and then it's up to, I guess, to an opinion whether it's a new language or just like a new strand of language. Did I get that right?
I think so. Like, we pretty much hit it on the head. That's as much as, like, I guess you can kind of, like, without going into the deep end of the pool. We are now at the middle part of the pool. We're in comfortable waters. So, I would assure that, yeah. And I would also.
So maybe through the Belter language, we can explore some of the controversial issues in the real world Creole, and some of the, I don't know, more complex ideas. Let's grab onto something we know, the Belter language, and through that, we can go forward. And maybe just to get the ball rolling, I'll throw out an example. Let me know what you think. In season 3, most of the season, Naomi Nagata, she's in this Nauvoo spaceship, now owned by the Belters.
Nice.
When she's there, I swear, her Belter accent is thicker. She's speaking more Beltery than she is when she's with her Earther boyfriend. The way that maybe African Americans, they speak differently when they speak to each other than when they speak to a white colleague, or on the street, or in an interview.
Every black American is bilingual. All of them. We speak street vernacular and we speak job interview. There's a certain way I gotta speak to have access. I speak in street vernacular because when I'm talking to an audience of people, I feel comfortable. It's like an extension. Really, crowds are like my friends. It's the most consistent part of my life since I was 14. But in certain situations, I gotta. I understand. I gotta use that job interview. Well, I don't like that deal.
What I meant by the word oppression, like, it's both literal and figurative. And what I mean by that is, like, everybody's kind of contained in this, and you're forced to like interact together, right? And when you're on something like the Naboo and you're only interacting with other belters, I think a part of you is going to like fall away that would normally have this kind of code switch, or like, you know, that they're going to become one. What we talked about with the Vygotsky, the zone of proximal development. It's going to eventually come into.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Remind me, please.
Essentially, like Vygotsky, he proposed that when either two languages, two dialects, any kind of form of social or psychological othering is coming in, you're learning about it. He said that eventually they must merge, that there has to be almost a fusion between the two learnings. And he said that this process, it was up to question whether it was more associated with language learning or with social learning. So I think a large part of Creoles are steeped in non-linguistic studies, and that what I mean by that is like it's more about the sociology of it, just kind of like the culture that's kind of fermented in the belt. So I think the Naboo is the perfect vessel, you know.
Perfect vessel.
Yeah. Yes. Well, so what you were talking about earlier about like grabbing onto something that we can, you know, what's the point where we can come into relation with, and I was really struggling with that until your good friend Dr. Rutger Voss came on, and he was like, oh yeah, it reminds me of the Age of Exploration, and I'm just like, oh man, why didn't I even think of that? Like, it's kind of perfect because in this, and I really thought about it. I was like, well, there's one key factor that I couldn't find between the Age of Exploration and this new Age of Exploration, and that was, unfortunately, it was the transatlantic slave trade that was started by, you know, the Dutch East Company, British companies, and lots of, you know, Portuguese, and basically everybody. But we found America, and it was this new opportunity, this like new, you know, a new way of life, and it should have completely destroyed any notion of kind of like what their most prescient thought about like God, the existential was, right? It should have completely obliterated it, but instead it kind of reinforces this manifest destiny attitude. So I think that like it's really strange in the belt and with Mars and Earth that this is a more of like corporate, you know, it's not slavery, but it's like almost kind of like the Industrial Revolution, where people are just disenfranchised to the point of enacting social change. It's a really big struggle in the real world because you have a lot of Creole exceptionalists who really put a lot of effort into maintaining and I guess propagating the prestige. That was a lot of alliterations right there. The prestige of the standard languages like French. There's a lot of contention. So Nick Farmer, the linguist for the show, he studies Creoles. So he describes himself as a Creolist, or very tentatively. We both listened to a podcast, and he was just very, very, I would say, reluctant to hold any kind of title of expertise on it. Like, he wasn't coming out there like saying that this was the way it was. And I think that's a good attitude to take when you're talking about something like this. But he specializes in Haitian Creoles, and a lot of that is focused in on the struggle between prestige between the super straight, which is French, and the substraight, which is a combination of Gebe and Fawn. And it's kind of become more a part of a social movement to try and focus more on the West African languages that played a role in the Creole development. And there's a lot of pushback against that, and it's because the French always seem to want to have like the absolute authority on a language, you know, like, no, if it's a good language, it's because it's French, you know, like, And I don't want to offend any French any of your French
no.
listeners.
No, but that's actually like if you want to be French, it's a republic there. So like you can be Jewish or Muslim or Christian, whatever, doesn't matter. But you have to speak French. That was like one of the things after the French Revolution. You have to speak French. So it's like in their culture, and also you can. You see debates, political debates. It's a whole other animal than Israeli or American the political debates. Just like, or in the news, like French, they call it like it's a language of masterpieces. I must agree. But that creates a sense of elitism and maybe rigidity that this is the way it is, and if somebody changes it, no, this is just perfect, let's not touch it. It's like you're walking in the streets of Paris and the entire city is so beautiful, you can't touch anything. Don't touch anything, this is perfect the way it is, we can never create anything better than this.
Right, and I think like that kind of attitude is really prevalent in The Expanse. You have Earth, you have this society that's, we're here, we are, the mother of this, and so you should just respect our ways and do it the right way, and we know what we're doing. And then you'd have something like Mars, which in turn is kind of like, I would almost describe Mars as like the technocrat. Like, if Mars had, if I could give Mars anything, it would be a giant black turtleneck, or like the mock turtleneck, so it could like just look like Steve Jobs. Like they're straight up like doing Silicon Valley stuff out there, and they're kind of, well, like a little bit. I mean, they're kind of sassing off to Earth, or telling them like, we're doing things that you can never do, and you really shouldn't speak to us like this anymore, because now I went to college and I'm paying my own bills. Like, I have my own insurance. And so like you have a dynamic set up like that, and then you have the redheaded stepchild that's the belt, and they're just like, oh yeah, that's right, we're totally plundering this.
So basically mirroring what happened in the real world, in Africa, in Haiti, and all kinds of other countries along the way of the slave trade. You had like a mix of languages, and they developed over time. Like, so we had here in Israel a few years ago a lot, like a few dozen, tens of thousands of people from the Ivory Coast. So I don't remember the name of their ethnicity. They were like the Muslim majority. They were a minority a while back, and they were in the opposition. Now they all came back because they're back in power. And they had like their own ethnic language, and you had French, and then you had like a mix, which is the same. So when they were speaking to me, they had to speak like in quote unquote proper French. When they were speaking to each other, they were either doing the mixed language, and or their native language. How does that combination? Is it from the top down or from the bottom up?
That's a really good question, Gil, and we are working very hard to answer it. So it's more or less like kind of where you are ideologically. If you're more on the side of, you think that it was more the substrate that had an influence on the superstrate, then you could argue that French itself has been changed because of its interactions with these, with these other cultures and these other countries. Or if you have more of a colonial, kind of traditional, I would say, we were all kind of, basically like everything kind of before postmodernism, it was kind of like led up to believe that like it was more top down. But I think that it's more interesting to think of the implications of a bottom up, because I
more
think,
options.
I think so too, and I think like it's like you're saying, there's just more of an effort being made. I think that the very fact that you have these two groups, both of which speak these very sub dialect, these variants of a dialect, but that they push themselves to create this communicative bridge with you, I think just shows me that like there's more possibilities in having mastery over several different varieties of it, but not necessarily like saying that, you know, one is better than the other. But I believe in kind of I have idealism in interdependence. I think that we kind of need each other in a way. You know, nobody can. I think that's also a point in the Expanse, is like you won't survive if you're gonna bunker down in these, you know, in these set ways. Like that's yeah, it's just not gonna work out. And I think that's the real danger, and what I think the Belter movement is kind of going through. They're really coming fast towards this crossroads of like almost destiny, you know, where you have the OPA, which before, you know, I was given kind of the exploration age context. I kind of set it more in not necessarily the revolution, the Red Revolution and the Russian Civil War, but more to like the Sino-Russian wars and kind of like the 10 years that led up to the dissolution of the Tsardom. And I thought about how it's sowing a lot of seeds between the OPA. It's really trying to make it clear to the audience that the OPA is not unified, and that's a very dangerous thing, because like you said, you're going to have a lot of these groups who are going to vie to be the dominant, you know, the one, right? Yeah. They want one Belterdom, you know, the one Belter code. But I think you're going to find that people are not going to like it. I don't think we very much like it when we're collectivized as people. Like, I don't think people are down for collectivization or like.
When we go back and we see the creation of nation states, and that's kind of like the process. So I haven't seen the 4th season and on, and I've read only 2.5 books, but that kind of seems like the project that the Belters are on to create their own nation state. If you go look to Italy or France, we can see collectivization, whatever, unification of the language. You choose one dialect and say, this is the language, this is the official language. And in the books, they make a point at saying that you have different kind of subsets of Belters within a station. Like the more you are next to the core of the asteroid, the more thick your accent is. And I guess if you have to create a nation that is spread across millions and millions of kilometers, because that's huge, you would have, even though it runs against the Belter sense of independence and like personal, creativity. And my favorite character, how did she call it? Drummer, her name, ingenuity, Belter ingenuity. Mm-hmm. They would have to have one language in order to be able to make sure that they talk to each other. It's like in India. They have 200 languages or more. So they had to, from the top down, say, okay, Hindi, everybody will know Hindi. Everybody has to know Hindi. In China, they had an easier time because everybody could write. The writing is the same. That's not a communist project. So it was easier to talk like everybody, no matter where you are in a huge country. Is there a way to unify a society without having one official language? That's a big question that you probably can't answer.
Well, I can think of an answer. I just don't think it's the answer that we want. Unfortunately, you know, so you have the Belter, you know, discrepancies of their different societies, right? But we have one variable in this that could change it all, and it's played by Jared Harris. I think that Dawes is the Lenin of the story. Like, he's going to be the one who, like, he's got the unions behind him, he's got the military behind him, he's going to totally wipe the floor. And unfortunately, if this goes along the trend of the Russian revolutions and then the subsequent civil wars, it's going to absolutely break down. So we're going to have like this Archduke of Ferdinand situation like we had with the Canterbury in it, where it's just the single shot of destiny is fired all of human history has changed. And I think that inevitably they want to push Mars and Earth into a war with one another, or that's what kind of where that's going. I think the belt's going to be dragged in, and then I think Dawes is the opportunist. I think he is, and he's going to use that to kind of crowbar, his movement away, and then just seek out and destroy anybody who's going to kind of cause problems in the future. The person, Gil, I'm sorry, I think you would be a problem for the movement, for the Belter movement. Is there a way that we could solve each other's problems peacefully? Like, what if we just talk to each other for a really long time? No. We got gunships.
Yes. We don't need to talk anymore. Yeah.
Well, I think that's like the hope, though, is the unfortunate. Well, I don't know. Like, I don't know enough about the Naboo to really say it, but I really liked it because it brings, I think, the major factor in what would be a peaceful unification, which is the formulation of an ideology or like of a religion almost. So you could take this like Aero Station crash, between Miller and Jane, right?
Julie
Mao, that's right. And you have this like these two figures of absolute like perfect, kind of like the best of the Belter, the one, those who would like kind of do for others without the expectation of having something, true kind of giving. But you have these figures, but I think like it's also true with the Mormon religion, where you just have this like everybody has to have like almost a deity to focus on. I think that us as humans, we just want something like that in our lives. We want that big answer, and to know that like, everything has been kind of destined for us in some way. So I think that they need this kind of myth, to go off of. And until they kind of have that, there's going to be no real, let's get together, let's band together. The Soviets had the party and they had the state. We have bald eagles and NASCAR and
and hot dogs, whatever, fried hot dogs.
Right. We all have like these mythical features that we all connect to, and I think without that, it's going to be very hard to come to any kind of unity on anything, except I also think another option would be economic or corporate assimilation, or kind of what's from Futurama, synergy, or where they land on the planet and I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't seen that much. I've seen the Futurama, but I don't remember the reference.
I don't even think it's from that show. Just I remember like corporate aliens land on a planet and they're like, "What's happening?" And they're like, "Oh, it's synergy. We're gonna blend." And it's just like this. It's like that's what I fear will happen. I hope it doesn't. I really like the character, the chairwoman in the UN, the secretary, the deputy secretary.
Yeah. Avasarala Sarala.
Yes, she is a tiger. Like she's just like. She kind of reminds me a little bit of, she's like a very tempered Tywin Lannister. She's like a Tywin Lannister, I think, like, kind of just really cooled down. Like, nothing's been dulled, nothing's been chipped off. She's just like this very stainless, kind of face of diplomacy. But I like her bravery. I like her tenacity, and she's just like, I'm gonna.
Yeah, in the books, I think she's more coarse.
Yeah.
She curses all the time. But how realistic is it that 300 years from now, Indians will speak English with the same Indian accent that they do today? Is that realistic?
I don't think so. I really thought about this. I really, really thought about this. And I think that the figures in the beginning of the book said that Earth was filled with 30 billion people, and no, 30. Is it
30
oh,
billion,
30
I'm saying,
billion?
okay, yeah, I'm shaking my head in disbelief,
Like-
not that you are wrong.
Yeah, like okay, so okay, we're supposed to believe that Earth has 30 billion people on it, right?
Oh my
And
goodness.
right, so the undertaking, the sociological undertaking that would require to get like a census on everybody who's just been there is just like, it's incomparable. Like it's incomprehensible. Sorry, and incomparable. But I think with the more concentrated deposits of populations in the belt, especially because there's only about 100,000 between each, and Ceres, the planet, I think has no. Like, I think they said that.
A few million, I think.
Yeah, like just like a couple. So it's just like, so that makes it a bit easier. On Mars, it's again a bit more difficult.
4 billion, I think they have.
4 billion
4
people.
billion.
So I think it's realistic on Mars. I think it's realistic in the belt. It is absolutely impossible on Earth. That is just like a hot melting soup. Like it's just like, but I think to try and like get my mind to wrap around how English is still even spoken, or I would think that English would will out in the end though, because it's like, it's kind of like Firefly in that way, where it's like, it's, you have the Belter Creoles, you have the different ethnic groupings, and you have the different cultural groupings, but at the end of the day, it's all kind of down to Mandarin and English, and it just, I think it kind of goes to show you that it's going to be it's not so much like English and Mandarin are diplomatic languages, but that they're the language of diplomatic corporate finance. You know, it's the language of
power. Also,
right,
directly.
right. It's the power. You know, it's the power languages that are going to make it. And I think that you have this bubble that can grow in. And again, it's like what makes the Belters so interesting is that they have these pretty, like, historically, traditionally very Soviet groupings of languages. You know, you have, you know, Hindi, you have the North African and West African languages, and then you have Russian and the Central Eurasians, and then you have a little bit of like German grammar, but mostly like Spanish. So it's a lot of like this very like ideologically, culturally different from Earth and Mars. You know, the Belters themselves have a different way of life because they have to live on ships and rocks that are at constant strain on their bodies, and it just makes them experience life differently. I don't know how else better to describe that, but I think
it's a good way to explain it.
right, it's a genius way to tell a story, I think, because if you really think about it, a lot of the characters do point out like the differences between, like, you know, how he views things versus how I view things, and it's very different from person to person, and the character Holden finds that out very quickly. Like, I think for a protagonist, Holden is probably one of the more adaptable characters I've ever come across. There's not really too much that I found that, like, he kind of really doesn't understand until Miller kills that scientist on this, and he's like at a loss for it, but
then
I'm not. Like, so, like, I wasn't. I was like, good job, Miller. Like, bye. We'll find out. We're pretty smart. We've made it this far. Like, oh man, oh yeah. You have people who I guess are kind of like the scientists who went neither here nor there with their ideology, but kind of had this stasis, and it kind of developed, in my opinion, this very, 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 very toxic and inhuman mode of thinking. Very removed, you know. I like this story a lot because it, at least to me, it calls a lot on more ancient texts, like ancient, but like the great odes, you know, like the Odyssey, like Plato's like reflections on the Republic, just very much like you have the ships that are named after these figures in it, and I really try to think about that. And again, like I said, I think what it's all trying to do is build towards this monolithic myth, or this kind of the new God of the, what's really going to take us there. And I
think that it's going to be better. You think it's going to be better at the end?
I think so. I think especially in the book. Well, in the books, I think it lays it out a little bit more obviously, where it's like these guys are organized, they are in control, they are doing they're really messing things up. And then you have the Mormons who are building this ship, and they're getting all these supplies from all the, everybody's very buddy with each other. And I think that's because they're kind of planning on at least not like, as you're saying, they're not taking the war option. I think they're taking the approach that you were talking about, where it's just going to culturally kind of assimilate all into itself. But also, too, I think what's going to be a really big point, and I have to thank Game of Thrones for this line of thinking, is that maybe they're, like you said, they're going to all develop into nation states of just like one or the other. You'll have Mars, and then you'll have Earth, and then you have the belt, and you have the moons of Jupiter, and they're each going to be their own thing. And I see it going that way because it's just, I can't like explain it. It's like it's too divided. Everybody's got their own goals in a way, to the point where they kind of can't come to a compromise, Yeah, especially like with Mars trying to like terraform Earth's, like, we need to get off this rock like permanently, like, and Mars, we're looking at you, buddy, like, can we stay there for a couple of weeks? I really enjoyed kind of coming to know this new show. It felt, after Game of Thrones, I have to admit, it felt a little bit like, like you were saying, you've been seeing somebody very seriously for a very long time, and it did not work out well for you, and so you're just but this new series comes along, and it's nice, and it's, it's fun, and it's really smart, and like, but you're just like, it's not Game of Thrones. But now I'm dating several people at the same time. Yeah, exactly. Now I've got anime to the left.
Yeah, you've got anime. I just watched The Boys. I like The Boys. There's a lot of political stuff to check out over there. Movies, Tarantino movies. I'm binging Tarantino movies. Okay, so that was very interesting, Mallert. Thank you. At Mallert on Twitter. At Mallert.
Right.
If people want to follow you, what kind of stuff are you posting on Twitter?
Really just anything that I like. I post a lot of different languages on there a lot. I tend to tweet a lot in French and German, but I also have been trying to learn Japanese, so I've been tweeting I've been retweeting in Japanese. I don't know what they're saying, but the pictures are fantastic.
Why? I think I'm not following you. Oh my goodness, I will follow you today. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all right. Like I really like actually the fact that I have such a small following on Twitter, so it really works out. But I'm always ready for change. So yeah.
Why not?
If you like looking at architecture, random anime screenshots of Sailor Moon and Serial Experiments Lane, just follow me. Or, just like if you like hearing my random thoughts, or seeing my dog, Lucy, because sometimes I'll post videos of her.
And you're just an interesting person. And
thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Valerie, so let's do it again. Let's think of a different, another conversation to do.
Definitely.
At another time. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening in.
Bye.
And we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.